The year was 1965, and the city of New York was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The civil rights movement was burning through the country, tearing at the seams of the old order. And in Harlem, the streets were vibrating with a tension that felt like the air before a thunderstorm. At the center of this storm stood a man the police called a plague, a gangster who had wrapped his fingers around the throat of the city with his numbers racket and his iron-fisted control. But to the people of Harlem, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was something far more complicated. He was a protector, a provider, a man who stood tall when the rest of the world wanted him on his knees. And then there was Julian Westbrook, the golden face of New York media, a man carved from marble and privilege, with a jawline that could cut glass and a voice that oozed calm, an authoritative reassurance. Every night he sat behind his mahogany desk at Rockefeller Center, telling the good people of the suburbs what to think and who to fear. He was arrogant, he was untouchable, and he was deeply, casually racist, not with burning crosses, but with a sneer disguised as a smile, with questions that were really accusations, and with the unshakable belief that he was superior to any man whose skin was darker than his own. Westbrook wanted a spectacle. He wanted to drag the king of Harlem into his studio and break him on live television. And behind closed doors, pouring a scotch for his producer, he'd made a promise. I'm going to make him lose his temper. And when the world sees the animal come out, the police will finally have the mandate to lock him away forever. He had no idea what he was inviting through his door. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a courier in a pressed uniform who looked deeply uncomfortable standing in the hallway of the Lenox Terrace apartments. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of stationery reserved for galas and governors' dinners, and it requested the pleasure of Mr. Ellsworth Johnson's company on the set of City in Focus for a live interview regarding the current state of affairs in Harlem. It was elegant, it was formal, and it was an insult dressed in a bow tie. Bumpy read it twice, then set it on the table beside his cigar ashtray. Within the hour, the apartment was a war room. Whispers arrived first, his long face already creased with worry. Where Nat Pettigrew came next, filling the doorway with his shoulders and his silence. Two more of Bumpy's inner circle filtered in behind them. The verdict was unanimous before anyone sat down. It's a setup, Whispers said, pacing the length of the living room. He controls the microphone. He controls the cameras. You walk into that building and you're playing on his court, by his rules in front of his people. He'll twist every word you say. He'll cut you off mid-sentence and let the audience fill in the rest with whatever they already believe about you. Whispers stopped pacing and looked Bumpy dead in the eye. He'll cut you up, Bumpy. He'll make you look foolish. Nat was more direct. Let me go down there instead. I'll give him an interview he won't forget. Nobody laughed. They all knew what Nat meant. Bumpy sat in his armchair, the invitation resting on his knee, and smoked his cigar in that slow, deliberate way that meant the gears were turning. The blue smoke rose toward the ceiling in lazy spirals. He could feel every eye in the room on him, waiting. He knew Whispers was right, every word of it. Julian Westbrook hadn't extended this invitation out of journalistic curiosity. He'd extended it the way a spider extends a silk thread. And yet, Bumpy thought about what it would look like if he declined. He thought about the headlines. Bumpy Johnson afraid to face the camera. Harlem's tough guy hides from questions. He thought about the smirk on Westbrook's face as he told 3 million viewers that the so-called king of Harlem didn't have the nerve to show up. I'm going, Bumpy said quietly. The room went still. He thinks he's inviting a gangster. He thinks he's going to sit across from a caricature, some illiterate thug he can poke with a stick until I snap. He doesn't know he's inviting a man who reads Nietzsche and plays chess. Bumpy crushed the cigar into the ashtray. Let him set his trap. I'll bring the bait. That evening, after the others had gone, Bumpy made one phone call. It was short. It was to a man named Sal, who operated out of a back office in Hell's Kitchen, a man whose ledger books held the secrets of half the powerful men in Manhattan. A favor was offered. A favor was accepted. And by the time Bumpy hung up the receiver, a single folded piece of paper, a gambling marker worth $50,000, signed in Julian Westbrook's own hand, was on its way to his apartment. Bumpy tucked it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, right next to his heart, somewhere where it sat like a loaded pistol with the safety off. He didn't know exactly when he'd use it, but he knew he wouldn't need a fist to win this fight. The morning of the interview was unseasonably cold. A bitter wind tore down the avenues of Manhattan, the kind that cut through wool and settled in your bones. But inside the Lenox Terrace apartment, Bumpy Johnson stood before his bedroom mirror in perfect stillness, and the cold could not touch him. He dressed the way a general lays out a battle plan, with precision, with intention, with the understanding that every detail carries weight. He selected the charcoal gray suit first. It had been tailored in Milan by a man who didn't ask questions and didn't cut corners. And when Bumpy pulled on the jacket, the fabric moved with him like a second skin. No bunching at the shoulders, or no pull across the back. It fits the way power fits a man who was born to carry it. The shirt was crisp white cotton, starched until the collar could stand on its own. He fastened each button slowly, deliberately, the way a priest prepares for communion. The tie came next, deep burgundy silk that caught the light and held it. He knotted it once, studied the result, pulled it free and knotted it again. Perfection was not optional tonight. Perfection was ammunition. He slid the pocket square into his breast pocket, a clean white triangle, sharp as a blade. He placed the fedora on his head last, tilting the brim to the precise angle that said, "I am not here to ask permission." Then he stood back and looked at the full picture. The man in the mirror did not look like a gangster. He did not look like a thug or a criminal or any of the words Julian Westbrook had rehearsed in his dressing room. The man in the mirror looked like a senator. He looked like the chairman of a Fortune 500 company. He looked like exactly what Julian Westbrook feared most in this world. A black man who could not be made to look small. Nat was waiting by the door with the car keys. Whispers leaned against the kitchen counter, still uneasy, his hat in his hands. Neither of them said a word. There was nothing left to say. They had argued their case and lost, and now all they could do was ride with him into whatever was waiting downtown. The black Cadillac pulled away from the curb and turned south. For a few blocks, Harlem held them. The barber shops with their doors propped open despite the chill. Made the women in heavy coats walking fast with grocery bags, the teenagers huddled on the corner, passing a cigarette and a lie between them. Music drifted from somewhere. It always drifted from somewhere in Harlem. Then they crossed 110th Street and the world changed. The brownstones fell away. The steel and glass towers of Midtown rose up around them like the walls of a canyon. Cold, enormous, indifferent. The sidewalks turned white. The rhythm of the street shifted from the loose, rolling pulse of jazz to the clipped, mechanical urgency of money. Bumpy watched it all pass through the window and said nothing. He had crossed this border 100 times. It never got lighter. The invisible line at 110th Street was as real as any fence, any wall, any locked door. North of it, he was a king. South of it, he was a problem. And the Cadillac moved deeper into Midtown, toward Rockefeller Center, toward the lights, toward the man who was waiting to destroy him. Bumpy touched the inside pocket of his jacket. The gambling marker was still there, folded and patient. He was ready. The Cadillac pulled up to the studio entrance at Rockefeller Center, and the hostility began before Bumpy's shoe touched the pavement. The doorman, a heavy-set man in a uniform threaded with gold braid, saw the car. He saw who was inside, and he hesitated. It was only a second or two, but it was enough. He looked at Bumpy, then at the driver, then back at Bumpy, his lip curling into something he probably didn't even know he was doing. He opened the door eventually, but he didn't offer a hand. He didn't say good evening. He simply stepped back, and his body doing what his mouth didn't need to, telling Bumpy Johnson, in the universal language of contempt, that he did not belong here. Bumpy stepped out as if the man didn't exist. They walked into the lobby, and the lobby noticed. It was a cathedral of marble and polished gold, the kind of space designed to make important people feel important and everyone else feel small. Secretaries froze mid-stride. An executive with a briefcase stopped so suddenly the man behind him nearly collided with his back. Heads turned. Conversations dropped to nothing. It was rare for a black man to walk through these doors unless he was carrying a mop or a tray of coffee. For a black man to walk in wearing a suit that cost more than the security guard made in a year, he'd walking with the unhurried stride of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. That was something the building had no protocol for. The reception desk produced a young woman with a tight smile and terrified eyes. "Mr. Johnson," she managed, "Mr. Westbrook is expecting you. Security will need to check you." Two guards materialized. Big men. Ex-cops by the look of them. Hands resting near their belts, shoulders squared, faces arranged into the particular expression of men who had been given permission to be aggressive. One of them, red-faced, thick-necked, stepped directly into Bumpy's space. "Arms out," the guard grunted. "Standard procedure." Nat moved forward, fists tightening, but Bumpy stopped him with a look. Just a look. Then he turned to the guard. He did not raise his arms. He simply held the man's gaze, a steady and unblinking, until the guard was the one who looked away. "I am a guest of Mr. Westbrook," Bumpy said softly. His voice didn't rise, but it carried through that marble lobby like a crack in stone. "I was invited here. I am unarmed. My men are unarmed. If you touch me, I will turn around. I will walk out that door, and your boss will have 3 million people staring at an empty chair tonight. And I suspect by tomorrow morning, you will be looking for work on the docks." The guard stepped back. His face flushed a deeper red, but he stepped back. They were led down long corridors lined with framed portraits, anchors, politicians, actors, all white, all smiling. The typing behind open doors stopped as they passed. Faces appeared in glass panels. The whispers trailed them like a wake behind a ship. "That's him. That's the gangster. That's the killer." The green room they were shown to was a deliberate cruelty. Small, beige, a bowl of stale fruit on the table. No flowers, no champagne. Bumpy knew the green rooms reserved for senators and movie stars were filled with both. This room was a holding cell with better lighting. It was designed to shrink a man down before the cameras ever turned on. Bumpy didn't sit. He stood in the center of that sad little room, hands clasped behind his back, examining the bare walls with the calm patience of a man who had survived far worse than bad hospitality. Let them play their games. He had come to play one of his own. 10 minutes they waited in that miserable room. 10 minutes of stale air and silence, the bowl of brown spotted fruit sitting on the table like an afterthought, the beige walls pressing in from every side. Bumpy stood in the center of the room with his hands clasped behind his back, examining a water stain on the ceiling, the way a man in a museum examines a painting, with patience, with mild interest, with absolutely no indication that his surroundings bothered him in the slightest. Then the door opened, and Julian Westbrook walked in. He was taller in person than he looked on television, immaculately groomed, every strand of hair cemented into place with pomade, his teeth so white they looked manufactured. He smelled of expensive cologne layered over something harder to name, ambition maybe, or contempt. He stood near the doorway, keeping a careful distance between himself and Bumpy, the way a man stands near a cage at the zoo, close enough to look, far enough to feel safe. But he did not offer his hand. "Mr. Johnson," Westbrook said, and the name came out of his mouth the way a man handles something dirty between two fingers at arm's length. "I'm glad you decided to show up. Frankly, we had a backup segment on the botanical gardens ready to go. We weren't sure you'd have the nerve." Bumpy turned to face him. "I have never been accused of lacking nerve, Mr. Westbrook." Westbrook let out a short laugh, a sound with no warmth in it whatsoever. "Yes, well, the streets are one thing. This is national television, different arena. There are rules here. Decency, decorum." He took a step closer. His voice dropped into a register that was soft, careful, and cruel. The tone a man uses on a child he considers slow, or a dog he expects to bite. "We're going to talk about Harlem, the numbers, the violence, the drugs. And I need you to give me straight answers. No street slang, no jive talk." He paused, letting the words land. "Speak clearly. The audience out there, they aren't used to your dialect. Try to articulate if you can. We don't want to have to subtitle you." The room went tight. Nat's fists clenched at his sides. Whispers inhaled sharply through his nose. Every man in Bumpy's circle recognized the insult for exactly what it was. Not production advice, but a declaration. You are beneath me. You are an animal I am allowing into my house. Know your place. Bumpy's expression did not change. Not a twitch, not a flicker. He regarded Westbrook the way a man regards a bug crawling across a tablecloth, with mild, almost scientific curiosity. I will do my best to make myself understood, Julian, Bumpy said. The first name landed like a slap, and Westbrook's left eye twitched. Nobody called him Julian, not on his set, not in his building. It's Mr. Westbrook, he corrected sharply. On air, it's Mr. Westbrook. We'll see, Bumpy said. Westbrook stared at him for a long moment, searching for a crack, a tremor, anything. He found nothing. He turned on his heel with a scoff. 5 minutes to air. Don't be late. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Nat broke first. Let me break his jaw, Bumpy. One hit, just one. He won't be talking so pretty with his teeth in his throat. Bumpy didn't look at Nat. He looked at his own reflection in the dark glass of a picture frame on the wall, and he adjusted his cufflinks, slowly, precisely the way a man checks his weapon before walking onto a battlefield. No, Bumpy said quietly. That's exactly what he wants. He wants the brute. He wants the animal. If I hit him, he wins. If I yell, he wins. He turned to face his men, and his eyes were calm and absolutely lethal. Tonight, Nat, we are not going to fight him with fists. We are going to kill him with the truth. He smoothed the front of his jacket, feeling the folded paper resting against his chest. And the truth hurts a man like that far more than any punch ever could. A knock came at the door. A young stage manager with a headset and terrified eyes. Mr. Johnson, we're ready for you. Bumpy buttoned his jacket. He straightened his tie. He looked at Whispers, then at Nat, and something passed between the three men that didn't need words. The silent understanding of soldiers who have walked into fire together before and know they are about to do it again. Then Bumpy Johnson walked out of that room and toward the lights. The transition from the corridor to the studio floor was like stepping from a dark alley into the mouth of the sun. Light hit him from every angle. Massive banks of white-hot lamps mounted on steel rigs above, flooding the set with a heat you could feel on your skin. The studio was cavernous, far larger than it appeared on any television screen. Cameras the size of refrigerators sat on wheeled platforms, manned by operators who watched Bumpy enter the way soldiers watch a prisoner cross a yard. Boom microphones hung from overhead arms, long and angular, suspended like vultures waiting for something to die. Beyond the lit circle of the set, the audience sat in rising rows. 300 faces, nearly all of them white, murmuring and craning their necks for a look at the monster from Harlem. Bumpy could feel their curiosity. He could feel the thing beneath it too, the hunger. They had come to see a savage brought low. They had come for blood sport dressed in the language of journalism. Westbrook was already seated behind his desk, that mahogany fortress of his, leaning back in a leather chair that probably cost more than some families in Harlem earned in a year. He was reviewing his notes with the practiced calm of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. On the opposite side of the desk sat the chair meant for Bumpy. It was wooden, unpadded, simple as a church pew. The kind of chair you give a man you want to make uncomfortable without saying a word. Bumpy sat down in it as if it were a throne. He crossed his legs. He folded his hands in his lap. He let his shoulders settle and his spine go straight, and in that single motion he made the wooden chair disappear. It didn't matter anymore. What the audience saw was a man who looked like he belonged in any room on earth. A makeup woman hurried over with a sponge and a tray of powder. She hesitated near Bumpy, unsure of herself. He smiled at her, the first genuine warmth anyone in the building had shown him. "I'm fine, darling," he said softly. "I don't wear a mask." Westbrook heard it. His jaw tightened. The stage manager counted down. The red lights on the cameras blinked to life, and 3 million Americans leaned closer to their television sets. "Good evening," Westbrook began, his voice sliding into that famous baritone like a hand into a silk glove. "Tonight, we take you inside the dark heart of Harlem, a world of shadows, vice, and violence, and we have with us the man the police call its cancer, Mr. Ellsworth Johnson. They call him Bumpy. He turned. Thank you for coming, although I suppose I should check my wallet before we begin. Laughter rippled through the audience. Cheap, easy. Westbrook smirked. Bumpy waited. He let the laughter drain away until the studio was silent again, and then he spoke. You can check your wallet if you like, Mr. Westbrook, but I believe you'll find that the only people in this city who steal from the poor are the ones sitting in the banks downtown, not the ones in Harlem. The laughter died in 300 throats. Westbrook's smirk slipped. Just a fraction, just for a heartbeat. But Bumpy saw it, and so did every camera in the room. Westbrook recovered. Very clever. But let's talk about facts. The police say you run a numbers racket that drains the savings of the very people you claim to protect. How do you justify taking milk money from starving families so you can buy Italian suits? Bumpy leaned forward slightly. The numbers game, Mr. Westbrook, is the poor man's stock market. Wall Street gambles with millions every day. When they crash the economy, the government bails them out. When a black woman in Harlem puts a dime on a number hoping to pay her rent, the police kick down her door. He paused. Why is gambling a business downtown but a crime uptown? Silence. Not the polite silence of a studio audience waiting for the next question. A heavier silence. The kind that falls when someone has said something true and the room doesn't know what to do with it. Westbrook pushed harder. Violence, murder, blood on the sidewalks. He wanted the conversation back on his terms, back in the gutter where he needed Bumpy to live. But Bumpy wouldn't stay there. Every time Westbrook shoved him toward criminality, Bumpy pivoted. To landlords who let children freeze in winter, to police who beat teenagers for walking down the wrong block, to a system that offered black men a mop or a cell and called it a choice. I don't create the jungle, Mr. Westbrook, Bumpy said, his voice never rising above the register of a man discussing the weather. I just learned how to survive in it. Something was shifting in the room. You could feel it the way you feel a tide change. Not all at once, but in the undertow. The audience had come to watch a takedown. What they were witnessing instead was a man who was smarter, calmer, and more articulate than the anchor trying to destroy him. And somewhere in the back of 300 minds, a deeply uncomfortable question was beginning to form. What if everything we were told about this man was wrong? Westbrook felt it slipping. He could see it in the faces beyond the lights. The confusion, the quiet recalculation. The interview was not going the way he had promised the network it would go. The animal was not emerging. The savage was not losing control. The man sitting in the wooden chair was making the man in the leather throne look small. Westbrook's fingers tightened around his pen. He needed to end this. He needed a weapon that couldn't be parried with eloquence or redirected with intellect. He needed to hit Bumpy Johnson somewhere that no amount of composure could protect. He needed to go for the family. Westbrook was losing, and he knew it. Every question he had prepared, every trap, every loaded accusation, had been turned inside out by a man sitting in a wooden chair with his legs crossed and his hands folded like he was discussing the weather. The audience that was supposed to be laughing at Bumpy Johnson was instead leaning forward, hanging on his every word. The producer was screaming in Westbrook's earpiece. The segment was running long. The ratings were climbing, but not in the direction Westbrook needed. Bumpy wasn't the savage on display, he was the professor. And Westbrook was beginning to look like the student who hadn't done the reading. So Westbrook did what desperate men have always done. He reached for the one weapon that requires no intelligence, no preparation, and no courage. So he went for the family. His posture changed. He leaned forward in his leather chair, and his voice dropped into a different register. Low, intimate, almost tender. The way a man speaks when he's about to say something truly unforgivable and wants the whole room to hear it. Let's talk about your daughter, Bumpy. The words landed differently than anything that had come before. The air in the studio shifted. Bumpy's eyes narrowed, just barely, a fraction of a degree, but he said nothing. Westbrook continued. You parade her around Harlem like a princess. You send her to fancy schools. You buy her dresses and pretend she's something she's not. He paused. He let the silence do its work. But everyone knows the truth. No matter how much money you spend on that girl, she will never be accepted. Not in this world. She will always be the daughter of a criminal. Another pause. The daughter of a primitive. A woman in the third row of the audience pressed her hand to her mouth. A cameraman stopped adjusting his lens and stood frozen behind the viewfinder. Westbrook wasn't finished. He tilted his head, a gesture of false sympathy, and delivered the line he had saved for exactly this moment. The line he believed would break Bumpy Johnson in half. Do you really think you can wash the stain of your black blood off of her with dirty money? Do you honestly believe she isn't ashamed of what you are? 3 million homes heard it. 3 million living rooms fell silent at the same instant. It was not a question. It was not journalism. It was a razor blade wrapped in a velvet glove. And it had been aimed not at the gangster, but at the father. At the softest, most unguarded place in Bumpy Johnson's soul. Westbrook leaned back. He folded his arms. And he smiled. The satisfied, reptilian smile of a man who believes he has just detonated a bomb. He waited for the explosion. He waited for the shout, the lunge, the clenched fist that would confirm everything he'd ever believed. What he got instead was silence. Bumpy Johnson did not move. He did not blink. He did not breathe. He sat in that wooden chair like something carved from stone, and the stillness that came over him was not the stillness of defeat. It was the stillness of a man who has just decided, calmly, precisely, without a trace of doubt, exactly how he is going to end you. He slowly, so slowly that every person in that studio felt the seconds stretch like wire, Bumpy Johnson reached into his inside pocket. The security guards in the shadows moved. Hands dropped to holsters. Westbrook's eyes went wide, darting to the wings, searching for someone, anyone to step in and stop what was happening. But Bumpy didn't produce a weapon. He produced a silver cigarette case. He opened it with a soft click that carried through the dead-silent studio like a gunshot. He took out a cigar, struck a match, and let the flame hold for a moment, bright and steady, before touching it to the tip. He drew in a long, unhurried breath. Then he exhaled, and the smoke drifted across the desk and settled around Julian Westbrook's face like a burial shroud. "You made a mistake, Julian," Bumpy said. His voice was low, almost gentle, or the way a doctor speaks before delivering a diagnosis that will change everything. "You thought you were interviewing a man who wanted your approval. You thought you could shame me." He checked his watch, casually as though he had somewhere better to be. "But you forgot one thing. We are on live television, which means there is no one in this building who can save you from the answer I'm about to give." In the control booth, the producer was slamming his palm against the console, screaming for a commercial break. But the director, a man who recognized history when it was unfolding in front of him, kept the cameras rolling. Bumpy reached into his jacket again. Westbrook flinched so hard his chair scraped backward. But this time, Bumpy's hand emerged holding a small folded piece of paper. He smoothed it open against the edge of Westbrook's mahogany desk, carefully, tenderly, the way a man unfolds a love letter, and turned it so the camera could read the ink. "You know a man named Sal," Bumpy said, not asking, "in Hell's Kitchen. A man who lends money to men who live beyond their means. Men who wear $300 suits and drive Jaguars but haven't paid their rent in 4 months. He tapped the paper. "This is a marker dated last Tuesday. $50,000. Your signature, Julian, your debt." The color left Westbrook's face in stages, pink to gray to something close to the color of ash. "You didn't bring me here to expose the truth about Harlem," Bumpy said, and now the softness was gone. "You brought me here to save your own skin. You thought if you destroyed the Black Menace on live television, you'd get your bonus, you'd pay off Sal, and you'd keep your teeth." Bumpy leaned forward. "You're not a journalist, Mr. Westbrook. You're a degenerate gambler trying to settle a debt with my reputation." Westbrook opened his mouth. Nothing came out but air. Bumpy stood. He rose from the wooden chair as though rising from a throne, and he looked down at the man who, 60 minutes ago, had owned this room. "You asked about my daughter," Bumpy said quietly. "You asked if she was ashamed." He picked up the gambling slip and let it fall into Westbrook's lap. "My daughter sleeps soundly at night, Julian. But your son, when he walks into school tomorrow, and the other children ask him why his father is a fraud who owes money to the mob, I wonder if he will be ashamed of you." The sound that came out of Julian Westbrook was not a word. It was the sound of a man whose entire life had just collapsed into a single, irreversible moment. "Cut the feed!" Westbrook screamed, his voice cracking, climbing into a pitch no one in 3 million homes had ever heard from the smooth, trusted anchor of City in Focus. He scrambled backward. His chair tipped. His body hit the polished studio floor with a thud that the boom microphone caught and broadcast to the nation. "Cut it! Cut it now! Security!" He lay there, tangled in his expensive suit, pointing a shaking finger at Bumpy, his face twisted into something between rage and terror. And he looked exactly like what he was. Not a giant, not a voice of authority, a small, frightened man who had gambled everything and lost. Bumpy reached into his pocket one last time. Westbrook flinched again, throwing his hands up. But Bumpy only pulled out a single, crisp $100 bill. He let it flutter down onto Westbrook's chest, where it landed softly, almost delicately, like a leaf falling on a grave. "For a cab," Bumpy said, "since Sal is going to take your car." Then he turned his back on Julian Westbrook, adjusted his cuffs, touched the knot of his tie, and walked toward the exit. He did not rush. He did not look back. Behind him, the red light on the camera finally blinked off, and the studio cut to a commercial for laundry detergent. But 3 million people had already seen everything they needed to see. Nobody applauded. Nobody booed. 300 people sat in those risers and watched Bumpy Johnson walk across that studio floor in absolute silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from having nothing to say, but from having no idea what you just witnessed. Gnat and whispers materialized from the wings and fell into step beside him, one on each flank. 3 dark suits moving through the chaos of panicked producers and frozen stage hands like a blade through smoke. Nobody stepped in their path. Nobody said a word. In the lobby, the world had already changed. The receptionist who had squeaked his name an hour ago now stood behind her desk with her hands clasped, staring at him with saucer-wide eyes. The security guard who had grunted arms out was nowhere to be seen. And the doorman, the heavy-set man in the gold braid, who had hesitated to open the car door, who had curled his lip, who had refused to say, "Sir," rushed forward now, pushing the revolving door open with both hands and something close to a bow. "Have a good night, mister." "It's Johnson," the doorman stammered. Bumpy stopped. He looked at the man, really looked at him, and there was no anger in his eyes, just a quiet, tired clarity. "You too, son. Try not to judge a book by its cover. Sometimes the cover is expensive, but the pages are blank." The cold night air hit them on the sidewalk. The Cadillac was waiting, engine running, exhaust rising in white clouds. They climbed in, the heavy door sealed shut, and for a long time nobody spoke. Nat broke first. He let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Bumpy, I have seen you do some cold things in my life, but that was murder. You killed that man without laying a finger on him." Whispers chuckled from the front seat, that dry rattle of his. "How'd you get the marker? Sal keeps those books tighter than a vault." Bumpy lit a fresh cigar. Sal needed a favor last week. Trouble with a union man who wouldn't bend. I handled it. When I saw Westbrook's name on the invitation, I called in the debt." He exhaled. Sal was happy to trade. "So you bought his debt," Whispers said. "I bought his soul," Bumpy corrected. "And tonight I cashed it in." The car crossed 110th Street, and something shifted. In the air, in the rhythm of the city, in the way the streetlights fell. Harlem was awake. People stood on the corners in the cold, pointing at the Cadillac as it rolled down Lenox Avenue. A group of young men outside a pool hall raised their fists. A woman on a stoop pressed her hand to her heart. They had seen it, all of it. At the apartment, Elise was sitting on the sofa. The television was still on, and playing a sitcom rerun. The network scrambling to fill the crater Westbrook had left behind. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She stood when Bumpy walked in. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "You made him hate you." Bumpy handed his coat to Nat, who disappeared into the kitchen without a word. He crossed the room and stood before his daughter, the face so like her mother's, the face he would burn the world to protect. "He already hated me, baby girl," Bumpy said gently. "He hated me before I walked in that door. He hated me because I exist." He took her hands. What I did tonight wasn't about making him hate me. It was about making him respect you. A tear slid down her cheek. He said terrible things about me, about us. He said what he thought, Bumpy said, and the world saw him for it. Oh, they saw the hate, and then they saw the cowardice. He pulled her close. You cannot kill hate, Elise. It's a weed that grows in the heart, but you can expose it. You can shine a light on it so bright that it withers. And tonight, Julian Westbrook learned that if you want to throw mud, you shouldn't do it while standing in a glass house. She pressed her face into his shoulder, and he held her, and neither of them said anything else for a while. The apartment was quiet. The city hummed outside, and the phone began to ring. Shrill, insistent, but Bumpy didn't move to answer it. He already knew who it would be. The bosses, the politicians. Everyone wanted to know if Bumpy Johnson had really just ended a man's career on live television. Let them wonder. Tonight, he was just a father holding his daughter. The network issued its statement before sunrise. Julian Westbrook has resigned from City and Focus effective immediately, citing personal health reasons. By noon, his name had been scraped off the marquee outside Rockefeller Center. By evening, his photograph had been removed from every hallway in the building, leaving faint rectangles on the walls where the frames had hung, pale ghosts of a man being erased in real time. The newspapers did the rest. The Post ran it first, then the Daily News, then even the Times, which printed the story with the restrained disgust of an institution forced to acknowledge that one of its own had been living a lie. The gambling debts, the loan shark, the hypocrisy of a man who had made his living lecturing the city on morality while bleeding money at private card tables in the Plaza Hotel. Well, if Bumpy had hit him, Westbrook might have survived it, might have played the martyr, the victim of a savage's violence, but Bumpy hadn't used his fists. He'd used the truth. And there is no bandage for that kind of wound. Westbrook's wife left within the week, took the children to her parents' estate in Connecticut, and didn't leave a forwarding address. He tried to find a lawyer. None would take the case. The evidence was irrefutable, and more importantly, no one in the city wanted to be the man who went up against Bumpy Johnson in open court. 3 weeks later, Whispers walked into the Flash Inn, shaking rain off his umbrella, and slid into the booth across from Bumpy, who was cutting a steak and listening to Coltrane bleed through the jukebox speakers. Saw Westbrook, Whispers said, pouring himself a drink. Downtown, near the Port Authority. Bumpy didn't look up. And? Looks rough, suit wrinkled, hadn't shaved in days, tried to get into a card game in the back of a deli on 9th Avenue. Whispers paused. They threw him out, said his credit was no good. Bumpy chewed slowly, swallowed, took a sip of red wine. Did he ask for me? No, but he keeps looking over his shoulder. I think he believes you're going to send someone to finish the job. Bumpy shook his head. There's no need to finish a job that's already done. A man like that needs an audience to exist, Whispers. Without the camera, without the chair, without the admiration. He's already dead. Just a ghost haunting a city that forgot his name. Rain streaked down the window. Bumpy looked through it at the slick streets of Harlem, at the people walking past in the cold, heads down, collars up, people who struggled, people who fought, people who had been told for centuries that they were less than the Westbrooks of this world. The only thing I fear, Bumpy said quietly, is a world where my daughter thinks she has to lower her head to anyone. And as long as I have breath in my body, I will make sure that world never exists. He signaled for the check. He stood. He put on his fedora. Come on, we have work to do. The numbers don't run themselves. They walked out of the Flash Inn and into the night, the king of Harlem in his shadow, leaving the ghost of Julian Westbrook somewhere far behind in the darkness. A cautionary tale burned into the static of the airwaves for anyone foolish enough to mistake Bumpy Johnson's silence for submission. You can come for the king, but you best not miss, and you certainly, absolutely, best not insult the princess. I'll see you in the next one.